Chapter 22, Treatment, Personality Disorders. Let me emphasize yet again, that I am using personality disorders in the widest sense of the words. Personality disorders are disorders in personality which will lead to either a formal diagnosis or will be the underlying cause in a neurosis. Personality disorders include those of us who never reached the golden age in childhood. The age where we overcame our performance anxiety, we set out and beat the unknown. We satisfied our curiosity. Those of us who never reached the shores of happiness because we were coping with extraneous anxieties and issues. In the golden age, we learned to seek happiness. Otherwise, we were left managing anxiety and avoiding sadness. Definitions of diagnosis change in time, and I am not going to go into why they should be or why they shouldn't be accepted. I am not capable of explaining why they disappear from the nomenclature and why they reappear. The carrying on around the launching of accepted classification manuals verges on a farce. I see little point in making a specific diagnosis about a personality disorder because, in my opinion, apart from two, the distinctions are of little significance. Apart from two major personality disorders, the treatments are exactly the same, so why bother making the distinction? The two major personality disorders which should be formally diagnosed are the psychopathic disorders of the sociopath and the psychopath. I often am quite confused by the nomenclature used in the two psychopathic disorders. Suffice it to say that one is inborn and that is generally agreed as being called a psychopath, and the other is acquired along the way and is known as sociopath. In both disorders, you can waste a lot of time trying to give therapy, and I know there are some therapies which claim to be successful. In my experience, it is best to try and modify the behavior in a behavioral setting designed for that which is usually a punitive one. The other set of personalities which come under different names also are those with a borderline trait. These personalities can exhibit psychotic-like features including disturbances in reality testing, and particularly, in judgment. They have poor impulse control and little ability to postpone immediate satisfaction. There are two groups, possibly three groups of personalities which are borderline: those who exhibit their borderline disorderly-like features in their control of their emotions, in their control of their impulses, and in their ability to test reality and judge it. As you can see, one of them is very similar, and as much of a muchness with the so-called sociopathic disorders. What is of great importance is that they should not be offered conventional therapies, and they should not be offered unsupervised online care. At best, nothing will happen, and at worst, they can make severe relapses. I am not going to try and mention the conventional therapies. There are many books written by very competent authors who can do much better than I can, nor am I presumptuous enough to suggest which ones you should read. I am a great proponent of online therapy and online intervention. I think it has a tremendous role to play, especially in third-party payment. I will be going into this in much more detail later in the book. What is different about this book is that I have attempted to give an accompanying example of how online therapy, interventions and management should and could look. I have built a site which you can enter, see and try for yourself. While some of you might feel this to be quite pretentious, you are probably right. But the proof of the pudding is in the eating. In Yorkshire, we say, put your wallet where your gob is, and that is what I did. Try the therapies, see what they do for you. Maybe you will suggest how to improve. I intend to use the site to examine more about fantasy world and in particular, the ability to daydream, when it starts and if it doesn't, what happens? I hope to test my theory that we may be able to see and diagnose a future psychotic by his ability to daydream. Imagine if it were true. We could recognize the defect and give them the safety valve which can possibly delay or prevent a psychotic breakdown. With all this in mind, let's pretend that we have the patient who has not undergone a psychosis or has exhibited borderline or antisocial traits. As I have explained, I think these people should not have unsupervised therapy, and they certainly should not be exposed to techniques which might weaken their reality testing. If you look at the site, you will see that I am particularly asking people questions which will, if answered in a certain way, suggest that either they do not enter the site at all. If they do enter the site, it is only at the advice of a professional who is aware of exactly what they are doing and has agreed that this is a good thing to do. The questions I would ask are: 1. Have you ever had hallucinations, whilst not under the influence of drugs or high temperature? 2. Have you ever had delusions, whilst not under the influence of drug or high temperature? 3. Has your mood changed over a period of more than 3 days where you had difficulties in functioning because it was so bad or became extravagant and needed to sleep less? 4. Have you ever planned to commit suicide? By this, I do not mean having ever thought about committing suicide. I am asking specifically if you planned how to do it. 5. Have you ever been indicted for a violent act? Or has there been any point in time where you have been in the position where authorities have intervened because of your bad temper? Before going into the therapies, I want to remind you, yet again, that we are talking about behavior changes, and all behavioral changes consists of the following stages. The stage that you understand. The stage that you begin to apply. The stage that what you have acquired becomes normal and feels comfortable. The stage where you forget or relapse and go back to your old ways. The stage where you decide to restart the cycle. The final stage is inevitable, and it is your job to make sure that you understand this and are prepared for the cycles, whereby the stage that you feel comfortable will get longer and longer, but it does not mean to say that you do not relapse, because you always will. Online group therapy. If you remember, when discussing group therapy, we described several stages the group goes to before it starts to work and work through. As the group works through the problem at hand, it also works as a unit with attitudes such as fear, flight, fight, paranoia, and partnering. The first 4 are obvious by their names, and partnering simply means that 2 people get together and seemingly take over the group. It may be more than 2, but usually it is only 2. Whenever this happens, one person in the group is doing the group's work. His personality and behavior will represent what the group is doing. This sounds far more complicated than it actually is. Each person should be able to relate to what is happening to the group as via what is happening to him. If this is the main part of the group activity in particular, then he is representing the group work. The paranoid member will represent the group paranoia. The aggressive will represent the fight tendency of the group. The group unofficial, yet tacitly accepted spokesperson is chosen because of his trait. Let us imagine that the group engages itself in an agenda which is persecutory in nature. I was deliberately berated by. And the group joins in with similar anecdotes. The representative of the attitude tends to be paranoid. If the group attitude, in a different example, is to take offense and berate, then the leading proponent molding the consensus or setting the tone is aggressive by nature. In any one issue, the group can choose many attitudes before giving a mature and insightful answer. There were 2 surprising findings we made when we tested this idea about 10 years ago. I had decided that by using emails there would be a delay between the reactions that were happening and the time it took to read and react to the reactions. So, I decided to artificially structure the group to suit the internet and to adapt it to the limitations of the internet. In other words, in real time, someone will say something or do something and it is immediately acted upon. Everyone reacts and internalizes something immediately. This process is slowed down by the need to receive and send emails. In my opinion, it turned out that this time gap was for the good of the group functioning. This is important to note, because every other aspect of the group work was much faster than I thought it would be, and more surprisingly, the group did not need an equivalent of a group leader and could do this work well on its own as it could do without a co-supervisor. So, what did we do and what are we going to do now? As you will see shortly, the basic idea is similar to the online therapy we will be using later. A list is made up of who will be the group leader for this session. Everyone in the group knows when his turn will arrive. A session consists of 1. The leader of the session writes an email which is sent to every member stating an incident which he feels they would like to discuss and analyze. 2. Each member of the group, apart from the leader, writes back to the leader and tells him what the member thinks the problem was and if there was previous experience from other rounds where this ties up with other information about the present leader of the group. 3. The leader composes a group email which he sends to each member of the group. The leader relates to each answer by stating what he believes to be the overt message and what is the hidden message. As an example, the overt message is what was written. The covert message is the meaning conveyed or what the reader understood and felt. The leader answers the group as a whole. referring what the group collective overt and collective hidden message was. As often happens, if the group was not involved in pure work, but in doing something diversionary, the leader would try and say what it was and who was responsible. The leader responds as well as he can to each individual message and what part the person played in the two group messages. What does that information add to what was known previously about the person who replied? 4. Each member can and probably will relate to what has been written about the member, what it has led him to think about or is reminded of. Finally, what has each member learned from this about themselves? 5. The leader sums up the group by summing up what he has learned about himself. With 5 or less simple emails, the session is ended. The time allotted for each 5 parts of the session is no longer than 2 days. If someone does not answer within 2 days, then their answer is foregone. The rotation of leadership is set up at the very beginning of the group's life, and if somebody does not accept the role within 48 hours, it automatically is passed on to the next person. As you see in the accompanying webpage, I've set this up again. I will try to make groups of 12 people to allow for dropouts. Give it a try to see what happens. I was surprised at just what a positive feedback I got 10 years ago. For some strange reason which I cannot explain, I've never tried to do it again. But, I am convinced that this can be an adjunct, a more structured form of self-help and certainly, a parallel process to the online therapy which I will now address. Online therapy. I have been experimenting with online therapy now for over 15 years and have made 2 sites. The first one, www.myray.com, was reasonably successful and especially used in India, of all places. I will mention later in the book why it was a commercial failure, and why I began to have my doubts about online therapy at all. Nevertheless, I decided to extend the principles of cognitive behavioral therapy as I was using in MyCybertherapy and developed something which would be the forebearer of the automatic everything I am referring to, www.myselfhealth.org/bod. MyRay.org was technically flawed from the outset. It was slow and clunky because of the technology available at the time. To bore you ever so slightly, because a therapy site must be able to readily use a database to enter and exit. It must be able to download the results. The program I was using, even with a very good technician, was not capable of bypassing the server and consequently, was slowed down. I hope that by the use of Caspio, we have overcome the problems of the different languages used, HTML5, the server language and the database language SQL. I will be attempting to sex up the web pages, and I'm not yet sure on writing, whether I can merge successfully Caspio and Adobe. So, what am I trying to do? I've stated all along that I really believe 2 things are happening. The first is the automatic everything. I'm simply taking the principle used in CBT and applying it to the way we feel and the way we behave. Into it, I've added a very watered-down version of mindfulness and added the PAC idea of behavioral classification to give us a better insight. The second principle is far more bombastic. I am simply saying that I do not believe you should be interpreting things for people. They can do it on their own, if they are shown what they are doing. They will see for themselves. As I've stated repeatedly, I feel that we are talking about behavior changes. In other words, you do not need a history lesson as you are digging deep into yourself, but a geography lesson, what the best roads taken if there is a traffic jam. You can do that very well on your own. The same goes for interpretations, and the significance of what went before you in life are more important than what you want to do in the future. Even though it's far from proven, I've had the audacity to ask people to fantasize and daydream about what they could be doing and asking them why they feel it shouldn't be done, or what is stopping them from doing it if it can be done. I strongly believe that the internet can and does give the best of therapy. But it is a new technique. We should recognize the internet for what it is, a rapid means of communicating and storing, whereby people can learn. In principle, I feel we should change therapy to make it best suited to the internet instead of trying to somehow make the internet suit the therapy. I think that you will be not getting the maximum out of a very powerful tool if you tried to make it do something it was not designed to do. The internet is not imitating life before internet. The internet has changed everything and will change therapy. The internet can do some things much better. So, let's go ahead and see if it works. The user, Hopefully your good self is invited in the first section to write down an incident which happened to you. You will be asked to simply write down what happened. Don't try and explain what happened or why it happened, simply write down, in a descriptive form, what happened. The example I always use is one involving road rage. I can very cheerfully tell you that I have cut my road rage down completely. I have artificially divided the sections up into those covering the way we think and how much is done automatically, the way we feel and how much of that is done automatically, the way we behave and how much that is done automatically. In this, I include the various beliefs that we have accumulated, and like all things accumulated, we never really look at them and never bother to throw them out when we need to. The idea being that you will easily be able to see what is happening and how you're doing it. Then, you will make natural choices which are best for you. Let's go on and see exactly what we're doing. At the end of every section or module, you will be asked if you wish to do another module. Eventually, you will decide to end the day's session and deal with this incident. You will be asked to write down what was the ideal thing to happen. By this, I mean that you try to fantasize and develop your imagination. Think of what you can only dream on. The sky is the limit. Remember, there is a firewall of reality testing. Even a cat can look at the queen and you can daydream about being a ruler. Now ask yourselves, what really happened? How are you behaving in terms of pack? And finally, probably most important, what have you learned about yourself as you are filling up the form? What alternatives did you really have? What did you choose and what would you change? Just one thing, do not be self-centered. These answers are stored, easily retrieved, and you see, wow, you are doing the same things for no good reason. Now, let us discuss the sections or modules, each relating to the critical incident. The automatic thinking module, we are trying to discover what your automatic thinking was. You will be asked 4 simple questions. What were your specific thoughts about yourself, and what do you think about yourself that very moment? I ask the same question with regard to the other person or persons who were involved. Things never happen in a vacuum. Then I ask, what were your general thoughts about yourself? Then we ask the same question about others, in general. Here we are trying to tease out the way you tend to think. Now, you will see very quickly in a few sessions, and I mean a very few sessions, a trend. My trend was that I tend to feel myself persecuted, and yet, here I am doing good. I tend to place myself thought-wise as some kind of Messiah or Jesus-type person who does good and is crucified. I have a terrible feeling this is what's going to happen when reviewers get hold of this book. As I said, after each section, this being one of the first, you will be asked if you want to do another module. If you do, then go ahead. If not, you are asked the same summation questions that I mentioned above. There is no need to repeat them, is there? Automatic feeling module, having done the first section and gotten to the gist of what is going on, I want you to stop. I want you to do something which is probably the most difficult thing to ask you to do. I want you to notice to yourself whenever you feel something, no matter what it is. Note to yourself that you had a feeling. That is all. Now, do the whole program from the beginning, in particular, using new critical incidents, and of course, the cognitive section. Now, I want to ask you very simple yes or no questions. The questions are, did you feel angry, sad, a sense of doom, fear, loneliness, or emptiness? You might find it difficult to write down, and say this was associated with a particular incident. Very often it will be something that you thought about with your automatic thinking and were not aware that you are thinking it. As you gain experience, and this can be achieved very quickly, you will tend to feel and be aware of feelings that before, you pushed aside. Do not be frightened, this passes quite quickly. I will then ask you, were you happy, content, excited, and did you manage these feelings? Why am I doing this? Very often thoughts, particularly automatic thinking, lead to feelings and you are identifying the feelings and not the thoughts. On the other hand, we often have automatic feelings that you simply are not aware of. This is why I am asking if you manage the sensation. Remember the saying, I have a feeling. You have that feeling and the feeling should not have you. In other words, you must have control, or at least knowledge, of what you are feeling. Of course, you are going to feel things. This is why I am asking if you are containing it. Again, we're going to finalize by asking the questions we asked previously. If you are not continuing to the next module, Automatic Behavior Module, in this module, you're going to see how often you are trying to control what is going on around you, so it will not jump up and bite you. What do I mean by this? Ask yourself if you were trying to gain attention. The question is obvious. Were you trying to invade the other's space? By this, I mean whose role were you taking? This ties in very much with the pack model, but not entirely. Were you competing with the person? Were you allowing him to be himself? Were you being subordinate when you didn't need to be? This is all part of space invading. Were you being a USB, inserting yourself into a USB port in another person's head? This may sound like a very silly question, but how often do you try to get into the head of the other person and try to work out what he is really thinking? Were you planning? Were you referring to protocols? Were you giving timetable? Were you giving explanations? All these activities seem to be perfectly normal because this is the way you have been brought up. You are thinking how to reduce the inevitable anxiety. I will not labor that you are not functioning in the golden age. But, this is also a very good way of avoiding anxiety. You are playing the game according to rules, and you are so busy obeying these rules that you forgot why you are playing. Obviously, at the end of the module we will be asked the usual questions, and I want you to bear in mind if you answered yes. Why did you answer yes? Often, even when we are in bad relationships, we don't bother to change because we don't know what the change will bring. We prefer the devil we know. As I've stated before, we are all very conservative, and if we can do without change, we will. So, we will again ask 2 more questions, but let me explain them first. The first one is quite obvious. By maintaining old feelings, it is another way of asking you if you have had this feeling before whilst in this relationship. Obviously, I am referring to unpleasant feelings. The next question is the observation that when we are in an unsatisfactory relationship, it tends to go through 3 phases. The best of the phases is the making up, the worst phase is place explosion, and in between the two, is a gradual breakdown leading to the explosion. Ask yourself, is this what is epitomizing what is happening between myself and the other person in this incident? We are at the end of all the modules and we are going to be asked the summation questions. We have come quite a long way, haven't we? Now, there is one further thing to do. Look at the different possibilities. You have to explore your answers and see how consistently you are repeating the same things, whether it be in your automatic thinking, feeling or behavior. You begin to see how it affects how you're functioning, what you were doing, what you wanted to do and what you thought was the best thing to do. Look how often you felt happy and start asking yourself, shouldn't it be more often, and does it have to be at the expense of others? I stated before and I'm going to say that again, happiness is not about doing your own thing. It's a feeling of more than that. It's a feeling of fulfillment and giving to others. I'm not talking about being an altruist or about you having to disappear to let others live. We don't all have to have the Jesus complex. Believe me, it's a very hard life to live. But, we can enter the golden age, even if belatedly. You are allowed to be happy. You were meant to be happy. We come to the end of this section dealing with treatment, and now, I am going to go on about the role of the services. In particular, I will be mentioning third-party payment and how services should be laid out, what effective society is, in particular, the role of society as it represents itself in the legal spheres, and how that affects us, too. In some cases, far too much.